The first thing she did was fall to her knees in front of me, and the second thing she said made my entire world stop. She was the most composed woman I had ever known, yet that afternoon her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely hold the strap of her purse. She looked into my eyes and begged me to pretend to be her fiancé because, as she whispered, the man who had destroyed her life was about to walk back into it. If you believe that kindness can arrive when we least expect it, that forgiveness can heal wounds we thought would never close, and that everyone deserves hope and a second chance, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. You never know whose heart might need a little hope today. My name is Everett Cole, and until that afternoon, I had never believed that pretending to love someone could somehow become the most honest thing I had ever done. I was 36, lived in a quiet apartment above a bookstore, and repaired antique furniture for a living. My life was simple. I had learned to appreciate simple after spending years watching my parents destroy each other over money, pride, and old resentments. I didn't trust grand promises. I trusted actions. I trusted people who showed up when things became difficult. And I especially trusted my longtime friend, Clara Whitmore, because she had always been one of those people. Clara worked as a restoration architect and had the unusual ability to walk into an abandoned building and see what it could become. She was elegant without trying to be, stubborn without being cruel, and generous in ways she rarely admitted. For almost 4 years, we had been friends, nothing more. We had shared coffee, helped each other move apartments, celebrated promotions, and sat quietly together when either of us had a terrible day. There had always been something unspoken between us, something neither of us dared touch because we were both afraid that naming it might destroy what we already had. Then, one warm Thursday afternoon, Clara appeared at my workshop. I knew immediately that something was wrong. She wasn't dressed for work, although she had clearly come straight from her office. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her eyes were red, and she kept looking over her shoulder as if she expected someone to appear behind her. She barely said hello before she crossed the workshop and gripped my hands. She told me that her ex-fiancé, Graham Mercer, had returned to town. The name meant nothing to me at first. But then I remembered the photographs I had once seen on Clara's phone, back when she had accidentally opened an old album. Graham had been handsome, wealthy, charming, and always smiling for the camera. Clara had looked happy beside him. But I had never forgotten the way her smile disappeared when I asked what happened between them. She had simply said that some people don't become monsters all at once. Now Graham was back. He had been gone for 3 years after their engagement collapsed. Clara had never explained the details, but I knew enough to understand that the relationship had left scars she didn't like showing. Graham had controlled her finances, isolated her from friends, constantly criticized her work, and convinced her that no one else would ever want her. When she finally broke away, she had spent months rebuilding a life he had carefully convinced her she didn't deserve. Now he had returned claiming he had changed. Worse, Clara's parents had invited him to a family charity luncheon that afternoon without telling her. They believed the two of them simply needed to talk. Graham had apparently told everyone that he regretted what he had done and wanted another chance. Clara was terrified. Then came the impossible request. She wanted me to attend the luncheon with her and pretend to be her fiancé. I almost laughed because I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. She said she needed Graham to believe she had moved on. She needed her family to stop pushing her toward reconciliation. Most of all, she needed one afternoon where Graham couldn't look at her and believe he still had power over her. I asked her why she had chosen me. Her eyes filled with tears. She said because I was the only man she trusted completely. That sentence stayed with me. So I agreed. An hour later, I stood beside Clara outside the elegant restaurant where the luncheon was being held. She wore a pale blue dress and looked beautiful, but her fingers were cold when she slipped her hand into mine. I could feel her trembling. I leaned closer and reminded her that she didn't have to prove anything to anyone. For the first time that day, she smiled. Inside, her parents greeted us with stunned expressions. Her mother stared at our joined hands, then at Clara's face, as if trying to understand a story she had somehow missed. Clara introduced me as her fiancé, and I played along. But something unexpected happened. It didn't feel like acting. When Clara laughed at something I said, her shoulders relaxed. When someone asked about our future, I instinctively spoke about the things I knew she wanted, not the things other people expected from her. I talked about her dream of restoring the old Whitmore Theatre. I mentioned the tiny garden she wanted outside her future home. I even remembered that she hated roses but loved wildflowers. Her mother looked at her daughter differently. For the first time, she seemed to realize how much she had failed to notice about Clara's life. Then the restaurant doors opened. Graham walked in. He stopped when he saw us. His smile disappeared. He looked at Clara, then at me, then at our hands. And with a confidence that made my stomach tighten, he smiled and said, "Nice try." The entire room seemed to freeze. Graham walked toward us as though he owned the space. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His calmness was more intimidating than anger. He said he knew Clara wasn't engaged to me. He claimed he knew her too well to believe she could move on so quickly. Clara's face went pale. I expected her to step behind me. Instead, she stood straighter. Graham reminded her of the years they had spent together. He talked about their old apartment, their engagement, the trips they had taken, the plans they had made. He presented their history as evidence that she belonged with him. Then he made the mistake that changed everything. He looked at me and said I was nothing more than a temporary replacement. I felt Clara's hand tighten around mine. But before I could answer, she did. She told him that he had spent years teaching her to doubt herself, and now he was trying to use her memories to do it again. Graham laughed. He said she was confused. Then he accused me of taking advantage of her vulnerability. That was when I realized something. This wasn't about me. It had never been about me. Graham needed Clara to believe that he still controlled the story of her life. So I stopped pretending. I told him I had agreed to come because Clara asked me to help her face something she was afraid of. But I also told him that I had spent enough time with her to know the truth he didn't understand. She wasn't confused. She wasn't broken. She wasn't waiting for him. She was healing. Graham's expression hardened. He said people like Clara always came back. And Clara finally said the words she had been afraid to say for 3 years. She told him she wasn't coming back. Graham left furious, but the moment he disappeared through the doors, Clara's strength collapsed. She walked outside, sat on a stone bench, and began crying. Not because Graham had won. Because for the first time, she had finally understood that she didn't need to be afraid of him anymore. I sat beside her without touching her. After several minutes, she admitted something she had never told me. She had known for months that she loved me. She had buried the feeling because she was afraid that after Graham, she would never know the difference between love and dependence again. She said she had asked me to pretend because pretending was safer than admitting what she truly wanted. My heart broke for her. Because I had been hiding the same truth. I told her that somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeing her as my best friend and started seeing her as the person I wanted beside me for the rest of my life. She looked at me through tear-filled eyes. And this time, there was no pretending. The following weeks weren't magically perfect. Graham attempted to contact Clara several times through mutual acquaintances. Clara struggled with guilt whenever she ignored him. She sometimes questioned whether she had been too harsh. Healing, I learned, wasn't a straight road. Some mornings she felt strong. Other days an old memory could reduce her to silence. But I stayed. Not as her rescuer. Not as her replacement for Graham. As her partner. That difference mattered. I encouraged her to make decisions without asking what I wanted. I reminded her that love didn't mean surrendering independence. When she wanted to rebuild her career, I supported her. When she wanted space, I gave it. When she needed reassurance, I didn't make her feel weak for asking. Months later, Clara received a letter from Graham. She opened it while I was repairing a chair in my workshop. He apologized. Not the kind of apology designed to win someone back, but a long letter acknowledging specific things he had done. He admitted that he had controlled her, isolated her, and made her believe she was incapable of surviving without him. He said he had finally started counseling. Clara read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully. She didn't call him. She didn't go back. She simply said she hoped he became a better man, even if she was never part of that journey. That was forgiveness. Not forgetting. Not returning. Just refusing to carry hatred into the future. A year after the luncheon, Clara and I stood inside the restored Whitmore Theatre. The building had once been abandoned, its windows broken and its walls covered in dust. Clara had spent countless hours bringing it back to life. On that afternoon, sunlight poured through the newly restored glass ceiling and filled the room with golden warmth. The theater was opening as a community arts center. Clara stood on the stage, looking at the crowd. Her parents were there. Friends were there. People from the neighborhood were there. And I stood near the front, watching the woman who had once begged me to pretend to be her fiancé. She didn't need to pretend anymore. When she walked toward me after the ceremony, she took my hand. Then she smiled and told me that the strangest thing about that terrible afternoon was that she had thought she was asking me to protect her. But in the end, she had learned how to protect herself. I told her that was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. She rested her head against my shoulder. And I realized that sometimes love doesn't arrive with flowers, music, or perfect timing. Sometimes love arrives when someone is frightened, broken, and convinced they aren't worthy of being loved. Sometimes it begins as a favor. Sometimes it hides behind a pretend engagement. And sometimes the person who walks into your life pretending to be your fiancé becomes the person who teaches you that you were never meant to live in fear again. Before I finish, I want to ask you something. If someone you loved had been hurt so deeply that they were afraid to trust again, would you have the patience to stay beside them without trying to control their healing? Leave a meaningful comment and tell our community what you believe real love should look like, possession or freedom. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because Clara taught me something I will never forget: the right person doesn't make you smaller so they can feel bigger. The right person gives you room to become yourself again. And when Clara finally walked away from her past, she didn't walk into my arms because she needed someone to save her. She walked into them because she had finally learned that she was strong enough to save herself. And I was simply grateful that, after everything she had survived, she chose to let me walk beside her. Not as a pretend fiancé, but as the man who loved her for real.